The salt air clung to my skin as I made my way up the narrow spiral staircase. 72 years of life had made my knees protest, but I'd climbed these same steps every morning for the past 15 years since Harold passed. The lighthouse keeper's duties don't pause for grief or arthritis. I reached the top and stepped onto the observation deck, the Atlantic Ocean stretching endlessly before me. Whitaker Light had stood on this rocky Maine coast since 1879, passed down through my husband's family for generations. Now it was mine to protect, not just a lighthouse, but our home, our history, our livelihood. Another day, I whispered to the horizon. The early morning fog was beginning to lift, revealing fishing boats already dotting the harbor below. I could make out Pete Sullivan's vessel heading out to check his lobster traps. The town of Port Haven was waking up, unaware of the storm brewing in my family. I made my way back down and entered the kitchen of the attached cottage that served as both our living quarters and a small bed and breakfast for tourists. The smell of coffee filled the air as I grabbed my favorite mug, a chipped blue one with "World's Best Grandma" painted on it, a gift from Abigail when she was just 10. The sound of heels clicking against hardwood announced Kendall's presence before I saw her. My daughter-in-law stood in the doorway, already dressed in a crisp white blouse and pencil skirt at 6:30 in the morning, her sleek bob perfectly styled, phone in hand. "Good morning, Dot," she said, without looking up from her screen. Bennett's still asleep. We were up late discussing options. I knew what options meant. They'd arrived 3 days ago with talk of helping me manage and planning for the future, but I wasn't born yesterday. "Coffee?" I offered, holding up the pot. "God, no. That stuff's like tar. I'll grab something at that new place in town later." She finally looked up. "We need to talk about this property, Dot. Bennett's too sentimental to say it directly, but this place is a gold mine if developed properly." I poured my coffee slowly, buying time. "This place is a historical landmark, Kendall. It's been in the family for 5 generations, I know." She cut in with a sigh. "But honestly, that's part of the appeal. The heritage angle is marketable. We could turn this whole peninsula into an exclusive resort. Keep the lighthouse as the centerpiece, very Instagram-worthy, but modernize everything else." I sat down at the worn kitchen table, running my hand over the groove where Harold used to rest his elbow every morning for 42 years. "I have guests booked through October." Kendall leaned against the counter, her expression softening into something that felt rehearsed. "A few tourists paying $70 a night is nothing compared to what this property could generate. The company I'm working with specializes in luxury coastal developments. They're prepared to make a very generous offer." "I'm not interested in offers, generous or otherwise." Her practiced smile faltered. "Dot, be reasonable. You're 72. Managing this place alone isn't sustainable. What happens when you can't climb those stairs anymore? When you can't keep up with the maintenance?" The question stung because I'd asked it myself on my worst days. The lighthouse was demanding. The constant battle against salt corrosion, the painting, the repairs, the bookkeeping for the B&B side. But it was mine. My purpose. My connection to Harold. "I manage just fine," I said firmly. "For now, maybe." Kendall moved to sit across from me. "But Bennett and I have been talking. It makes sense for you to sell while the market is hot, move into a nice retirement community in Portland. No more worries, no more winter storms, no more tourists tracking sand through your living room." I looked out the window toward the lighthouse tower. Morning sunlight now gleamed off its freshly painted white surface. I'd spent 3 weeks on that paint job last spring, working alongside Everett Sullivan, who'd volunteered his help despite his own arthritic hands. "This conversation is over, Kendall," I said, standing up. "I have bread to bake before the Andersons wake up. They're in the blue room for 2 more nights." She stood too, all pretense of warmth vanishing. "This isn't going away, Dot. Bennett might tiptoe around your feelings, but I'm practical. You can't maintain this place, and eventually something will give, either the lighthouse or you. Better to make the decision while you still can." The truth she wouldn't say hung in the air between us. They were waiting for me to die. The lighthouse would pass to Bennett, and then nothing would stand in their way. "I have work to do," I said, turning toward the pantry. As I reached for the flour, I heard her mutter something into her phone. I shouldn't have asked, but I did. "What was that?" She glanced up, seemingly surprised I was still there. Just confirming a call with the developers. They're very interested in this property. Very interested. And I'm very uninterested in selling my home. Kendall's perfectly manicured hand tightened around her phone. You know, this stubbornness isn't fair to Bennett. He deserves his inheritance while he can actually enjoy it. While we can build something with it. The lighthouse will be Bennett's someday, I acknowledged. What he does with it then will be his choice. Someday, she repeated with a bitter laugh. That's the problem, isn't it? We're all just waiting around for someday. I felt a chill despite the warm kitchen. What exactly does that mean? She shrugged, but her eyes were cold. Just that at your age, planning for the future becomes something of a limited exercise, doesn't it? Before I could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Bennett appeared, hair tousled from sleep, still in his pajamas. At 45, my son had Harold's height and my stubborn chin, but somewhere along the way, he'd lost the sparkle that had made him the joy of our lives. Success in Boston had come with a price, a crease between his eyebrows that never quite smoothed out anymore. "Morning, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek before heading straight for the coffee. "What are you two discussing so intensely?" "The future," Kendall answered before I could. "Your mother doesn't seem to think it's worth planning for." Bennett gave her a warning look. "Ken, we agreed to take this slowly." "We've been taking it slowly for 3 years," she snapped. "Meanwhile, properties all along this coast are being snatched up. The Thompson Lighthouse down in Camden sold for $4.2 million last month. This one's bigger, with better views and more land." I stared at my son. "You've been planning this for 3 years?" Bennett had the decency to look ashamed. "Not planning, Mom. Just considering options. You're not getting any younger, and this place is a lot of work." "It's my work to do," I said firmly. "And I'm not ready to stop doing it." Kendall made a sound of frustration. "This is exactly why we need to be more direct." She turned to me, all pretense gone. Be realistic. The smart move is to sell now, while you can benefit from the money. Get yourself a nice condo, travel a little, enjoy your remaining years." "Kendall," Bennett scolded. "What? I'm saying what you won't." She turned back to me. "The developers are coming tomorrow. Just hear their pitch. That's all we're asking." I looked between them. My son who couldn't meet my eyes and his wife who wouldn't stop staring me down. "No." "Mom, please," Bennett started. I said no. I turned to pull ingredients from the pantry, my hands shaking slightly. "This lighthouse has been in your father's family since it was built. Your great-great-grandfather was the first keeper. Your grandfather modernized it after the war. Your father turned the keeper's house into a B&B when the light was automated, and I've maintained it all since he died. I'm not selling it to become some playground for the rich." Kendall threw up her hands. "God, the sentimentality in this family is suffocating. It's a building, not a person." "It's my home," I countered. "It's a liability," she shot back. "A money pit that's one bad storm away from bankrupting you." "And then what? You think Bennett and I can afford to fix it? To take care of you and this crumbling landmark? I've never asked you to take care of me." "No, but you will," she said coldly. "When you're too frail to climb those stairs or too confused to run the books, then it becomes our problem, and we'll be forced to sell anyway, probably for less than we could get now." Bennett set down his coffee cup with a sharp clink. "Enough, both of you. Mom, we're just asking you to listen to the offer. Kendall, back off. This isn't helping." Kendall grabbed her purse from the counter. "I need some air. I'll be in town." She paused at the door. "The developers will be here tomorrow at 10 a.m. If you won't do this for yourself, at least consider what it means for your son's future." After she left, silence hung heavy in the kitchen. Bennett sighed, running a hand through his hair, just like Harold used to do when stressed. "She doesn't mean to be harsh, Mom. She just sees the potential here." "The potential profit, you mean," I corrected. "It's not just about money. It's about practicality. You can't run this place forever." I measured flour into a bowl with more force than necessary. "I'm not dead yet, Bennett." "No one's saying you are," he protested weakly. "Aren't you? Isn't that what this is about? Waiting for me to die so you can cash in on your inheritance?" His face reddened. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair," I agreed, my voice breaking slightly. "I never thought I'd have to defend my home against my own family." Bennett came to me then, putting his arms around my shoulders in an awkward hug. "I love you, Mom. I'm just worried about you out here all alone." "I'm not alone," I said. "I have the lighthouse. I have my friends in town. I have the guests who come back year after year. But when winter comes, I've weathered plenty of winters, Bennett." I gently removed his arms and returned to my baking. "I'm making blueberry muffins for the Andersons. If you're staying for breakfast, set the table." He hesitated, then began gathering plates from the cabinet. We worked in silence for a while, falling into the old rhythms we'd established over decades of shared meals. "She wasn't always like this," he said suddenly. "Kendall, I mean. When we met, she was excited about my family history, the lighthouse, all of it." I didn't respond. What could I say? That I'd never warmed to the woman he'd married after a whirlwind 3-month romance? That I'd seen through her fascination with our quaint family history to the calculation beneath? "The recession hit her family hard," he continued. "They lost everything. I think that's why security means so much to her now. And you think selling my home will give her security? I think it would give all of us options," he said carefully. "The money would secure your future too, Mom." I slid the muffin tin into the oven and set the timer. "My future is here, Bennett, in this lighthouse. The sooner you and Kendall accept that, the better for everyone." He opened his mouth to argue, but the front door chimed, signaling the Andersons were back from their early morning walk. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to greet them, grateful for the interruption. The day passed in a blur of chores and awkward interactions. Bennett tried to help around the property, fixing a loose shutter and weeding the garden path, while I tended to my guests and kept the lighthouse running. By evening, I was exhausted, not just from the physical work, but from the emotional weight of the confrontation that morning. I was in the lighthouse tower for the evening check when I heard voices below. Through the open window, Kendall's distinctive tone carried up the spiral staircase. She and Bennett were on the path below, arguing. "I'm not waiting around forever while she stubbornly clings to this place," Kendall was saying. "We had a plan, Bennett. The developers are perfect partners for this project. She's my mother, Ken. I can't force her out of her home." "You won't have to force her. She can't maintain this place much longer. Did you see her struggling with that mop bucket today? It's only a matter of time." There was a pause before Bennett responded. "That doesn't mean we should pressure her." "It means exactly that," Kendall insisted. "Every day we wait is money lost. That old woman is holding our future hostage with her sentimentality." "Don't call her that," Bennett said, but his voice lacked conviction. Kendall's laugh was sharp. "What? Old? She is old, Bennett, and getting older every day. How long do you want to put our lives on hold? 5 years? 10? However long it takes for her to—" "Stop it," Bennett cut in. "I won't have this conversation." "Well, I will." Kendall's voice rose. "I'm tired of pretending. The truth is, our lives won't really begin until your mother is gone, and this property is ours to develop. I've wasted 3 years waiting already." The silence that followed was deafening. I stood frozen by the window, waiting for my son to defend me. "You don't mean that," he finally said, his voice strained. "Don't I?" Kendall's tone had turned icy. "Let me be perfectly clear then. I want this property developed. I want the life and opportunities it will bring us. And yes, if your mother stands in the way of that until her last breath, then I'll just have to wait." I gripped the lighthouse railing, my knuckles white. "And when that day comes," she continued, her voice rising hysterically, "when we finally get what should already be ours, I swear to God, Bennett, I want to dance at your mother's funeral. I want to dance on the ground where this lighthouse stands before we tear it down and build something that actually matters." The words struck like physical blows. "Dance at my funeral. Dance at my funeral." The phrase echoed in my head as I stood there, unseen, 72 years of life suddenly reduced to an inconvenient waiting period for my daughter-in-law's ambitions. I didn't hear Bennett's response. The blood rushing in my ears drowned out everything else. I sank to the floor of the lighthouse tower, my back against the cool stone wall, and let the tears come. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but the quiet weeping of a woman who has just realized how disposable she has become to her own family. When I finally gathered myself and descended the spiral staircase, the sun had set. The beam from the automated light swept across the darkening water, a rhythm as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. I made my way back to the cottage, where I found Bennett sitting alone in the kitchen. "Mom," he said, standing quickly, "I was just about to come find you. The Andersons said they're headed into town for dinner." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Are you okay? You look—" "I heard you," I said simply. "Both of you, by the lighthouse." The color drained from his face. "Mom, she didn't mean—" "Stop." I held up my hand. "I don't want excuses. I want the truth. Is that really how you both feel? That I'm just an obstacle? That my death is something to look forward to?" "Of course not," he protested, but his eyes slid away from mine. "Kendall gets emotional. She says things she doesn't mean." "Does she?" I moved to the kitchen window, looking out at the lighthouse silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Because it sounded like she's been waiting quite patiently for me to die so you can sell my home." "It's more complicated than that." "It's actually very simple," I countered. "You want what I have. You're not willing to wait until I'm gone to get it. And your wife is resentful enough about it that she wants to dance at my funeral." Bennett flinched at the words. "I would never let that happen." "Which part? The dancing or the selling?" He had no answer for that. I took a deep breath. "I think you and Kendall should leave tomorrow. Go back to Boston. This visit is over." "Mom, please, we can work this out." "There's nothing to work out," I said firmly. "This is my home. I'm not selling it. Not tomorrow, not next year, not ever while I have breath in my body. And after hearing what your wife really thinks of me, I'd prefer not to have her under my roof." "She's upset. She didn't mean it." "She meant every word," I interrupted. "And the fact that you're defending her rather than apologizing tells me everything I need to know about where your loyalties lie." Bennett looked stricken. "You're my mother. I love you. And yet you've spent 3 years planning to sell my home out from under me." "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Bennett?" I asked, suddenly exhausted. "Explain it to me in a way that doesn't amount to waiting for me to die or become too feeble to fight back." He couldn't. We both knew it. "I'm going to bed," I said after the silence had stretched too long. "I expect you and Kendall to be gone by the time I finish the breakfast service tomorrow." I left him standing in the kitchen, his face a mask of confusion and guilt. In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed Harold and I had shared for 42 years. And for the second time that evening, I allowed myself to cry. Not just for the betrayal, but for the realization that the son I raised could stand silently while his wife wished for my death. But as the tears dried, something else took their place. A slow-burning determination. A steel I hadn't needed to call upon since Harold's passing had left me to run the lighthouse alone. Kendall wanted to dance at my funeral? Fine. But I would make damn sure she'd regret those words long before I was in the ground. I was Dolores Whitaker, keeper of Whitaker Light. I had weathered storms that would have washed away lesser souls. And I wasn't about to let my daughter-in-law's cruelty or my son's weakness be the thing that finally broke me. Tomorrow, they would leave. And then, I would begin to fight back. The morning after I'd overheard Kendall's cruel words, I rose before dawn, as I always did. The familiar ache in my knees greeted me as I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. Outside my window, the first hint of light touched the horizon, painting the Atlantic in shades of gray and purple. I dressed quickly in my usual outfit, sturdy jeans, a flannel shirt, and the weathered blue cardigan that had once belonged to Harold. I made my way to the kitchen and started the coffee, comforted by the routine. By the time the pot had finished brewing, I heard movement upstairs. Bennett and Kendall were packing. Good. I'd meant what I said about them leaving. Some wounds cut too deep for quick forgiveness. I climbed the lighthouse tower for my morning check, clipboard in hand. From the top, I could see the entire property. The keeper's cottage with its adjoining B&B rooms, the small garden I'd maintained for decades, the path winding down to the rocky beach, and the narrow road that connected us to Port Haven 3 miles away. It was a clear day. The storms of yesterday, both meteorological and emotional, having passed, leaving a pristine blue sky in their wake. When I returned to the cottage, Bennett was in the kitchen, 2 suitcases by the door, alone. "Kendall's bringing the car around," he said awkwardly. "Mom, about yesterday." "I've already set out breakfast for the Andersons," I interrupted, unwilling to hear whatever excuse he'd rehearsed overnight. "They'll be checking out at 11. He sighed, shoulders slumping. "We're really leaving it like this?" You left it like this when you started plotting to sell my home behind my back. I busied myself wiping down the already clean counter. It wasn't plotting. It was planning for inevitability. The only inevitability, I said, finally facing him, is that we all die someday. But I'm still very much alive, Bennett, and I intend to stay that way for quite a while. A car horn sounded outside. Kendall, impatient as always. Bennett hesitated, then pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table. The developer's contact information. Just keep it, in case you change your mind. I didn't touch the envelope. I won't. Mom, you should go. Your wife is waiting. He picked up the suitcases, then paused at the door. I do love you, whatever you might think right now. I felt my resolve soften slightly. He was my son, after all, my only child. I know you do, Bennett, in your way, but love without respect isn't enough. After they drove away, the cottage felt eerily quiet, despite the Andersons chatting in the dining nook. I served them their breakfast, going through the motions of pleasant conversation, while my mind raced with what had happened and what would happen next. Because one thing was certain, Kendall wouldn't give up easily. This retreat was tactical, not surrender. They would be back with another strategy, another angle. And next time, they might not be so direct about it. I needed allies. I needed a plan. After the Andersons checked out, I closed the B&B for the day, something I rarely did during tourist season, and walked into town. Port Haven wasn't much. A main street with shops catering to summer visitors, a small grocery, Winnie's Pharmacy, a hardware store owned by the Tanner family for generations, and Sal's Diner, where locals gathered for gossip as much as food. The bell jingled as I pushed open the pharmacy door. Winnie Caldwell looked up from behind the counter, her silver hair pulled back in its usual bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. Dot Whitaker, twice in 1 week. Don't tell me you're getting sociable in your old age. Her laugh lines deepened as she smiled. We need to talk, I said, forgoing our usual pleasantries. Is there somewhere private? Concern immediately replaced the humor in her eyes. Break room's empty. Samantha's out for lunch. She called to her grandson's stocking shelves. Tyler, mind the register for a bit. In the cramped break room, surrounded by pharmaceutical catalogs and employee timesheets, I told Winnie everything. Bennett and Kendall's arrival, their pressure to sell, and finally, the devastating words I'd overheard. Dance at your funeral? Winnie's voice rose in outrage. That little snake? I never trusted those city shoes of hers, clicking around town like she owns the place. They left this morning, I said. But this isn't over. They'll be back, or worse, they'll try some other tactic. Bennett mentioned developers coming to look at the property. What if they show up anyway? Winnie reached across the table and gripped my hand. Her fingers were spotted with age, but still strong from decades of counting pills and stocking shelves. Then you'll tell them to take a long walk off a short pier. That lighthouse is yours, Dot. Harold left it to you, not Bennett, not that gold-digger wife of his. For now, I acknowledged. But they're right about one thing, I am getting older. What happens when I can't manage anymore? Cross that bridge when you come to it, Winnie advised. Meanwhile, we need to make sure everyone in town knows what's happening. If those developers come sniffing around, they'll get a proper Port Haven welcome. By proper welcome, I knew she meant the collective cold shoulder that had driven away many unwanted visitors over the years. Port Haven protected its own. There's something else, I said hesitantly. I've been thinking about what Kendall said, about the lighthouse being a liability, a money pit. Don't you listen to her nonsense. No, hear me out. She's wrong about selling, but she's not entirely wrong about the finances. The B&B brings in enough during tourist season, but winters are lean. I've been dipping into savings the past few years for repairs. Winnie's expression softened. Harold always did worry about leaving you with enough. He left me plenty, I assured her, but it won't last forever, especially with the north wall needing reinforcement before winter. What are you thinking, Dot? I took a deep breath. I'm thinking I need to make the lighthouse more profitable. Show Bennett and Kendall and myself that I can do more than just maintain it, that I can make it thrive. How? I don't know yet. But I need to try something new, something that brings in visitors year-round, not just summer tourists. Winnie nodded thoughtfully. You know who you should talk to? Jasper Rodriguez. He's staying at the Marina Inn, working on some documentary about New England lighthouses. Came into the pharmacy yesterday for seasickness pills. Seemed quite knowledgeable about historical preservation and such. The name sparked a memory. The filmmaker? I think I read about him in the Portland Press Herald. That's him. Won some award for his documentary on disappearing rural post offices. Maybe he'd be interested in featuring your lighthouse. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I'll find him. Thanks, Winnie. Don't thank me yet, she said, standing. But do come to dinner tonight, 6 o'clock. I'm making pot roast, and you shouldn't be alone right now. I started to protest that I was fine on my own, then realized I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts in the empty cottage. I'll bring dessert. As I left the pharmacy, I noticed a flyer on the community bulletin board by the door. Port Haven Historical Society meeting, this Thursday. Special guest, Professor Everett Sullivan. Topic, Preserving Our Maritime Heritage. Everett Sullivan. I hadn't seen him since Harold's funeral, when he'd awkwardly offered condolences and then disappeared back to his university position in Boston. We'd been close once, before Harold, before life took us in different directions. I'd heard he'd retired back to Port Haven last year, but our paths hadn't crossed. I tore off one of the paper tabs with the meeting details, another potential ally. The Marina Inn was at the other end of town, a modest 3-story building overlooking the harbor. The lobby was decorated with the expected nautical kitsch, ship wheels, fishing nets, and framed photographs of vessels that had once called Port Haven home. The young woman at the front desk looked up from her phone. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Jasper Rodriguez. I believe he's a guest here." "The documentary guy?" "Yeah, he's out back on the deck, working," he said, "but it looked like napping to me." She smirked. I thanked her and made my way through the lobby to the back deck that overlooked the marina. A man in his early 50s dozed in an Adirondack chair, a notepad open on his lap, a camera bag at his feet. His dark hair was streaked with gray at the temples, and his face bore the weathered look of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. "Mr. Rodriguez?" I said, approaching cautiously. He startled awake, nearly dropping his notepad. "I wasn't sleeping, just, contemplating the harbor's visual composition." He squinted up at me. "Do I know you?" "Not yet. I'm Dolores Whitaker. I own Whitaker Light up on North Point." That got his attention. He sat up straighter. "The lighthouse that's been in the same family since it was built? That's on my list to visit. I've been working my way north along the coast." "Well, consider this an invitation to move it up your schedule." I sat in the chair beside him. "I understand you're making a documentary about lighthouses. Part of a series on vanishing Americana," he confirmed. "Too many of these historic structures are being lost to development or neglect. I'm trying to document them while they still exist in their original form." A chill ran through me at his words. Exactly what Kendall wanted to do. Erase the original lighthouse and replace it with some sanitized, commercialized version. "That's actually why I'm here," I said. "My lighthouse is under threat." His expression darkened. "Developers?" "My son and daughter-in-law. They want me to sell to a resort company. Let me guess, they'll promise to preserve the historic character while gutting everything that makes it authentic." "Exactly." I felt a surprising relief at being understood so quickly. "They want to turn it into an Instagram-worthy centerpiece for wealthy tourists." Jasper shook his head in disgust. "I've seen it happen up and down the coast. These places aren't just buildings. They're living history. Once they're gone, that connection to the past is lost forever." "I won't sell," I assured him. "But I need to prove the lighthouse can be more than just a seasonal B&B, that it has value beyond the land it sits on." He studied me for a moment, then reached for his camera bag. "I've been documenting lighthouse keepers as well as the structures themselves. The human stories are what bring these places to life." He pulled out a professional-looking camera. "Would you be willing to be interviewed? To tell your lighthouse's story?" It wasn't quite what I had in mind, but it was something. "If it helps protect Whitaker Light, yes." "Excellent." He checked his watch. "I have some calls to make this afternoon, but I could come by tomorrow morning, get some footage of your daily routine, the interior of the lighthouse, the grounds." 8 a.m., I said. "That's when I do my morning inspection." As I stood to leave, he added, "Mrs. Whitaker, there might be grants available for historic preservation, organizations that help fund maintenance for privately owned landmarks. I've got some contacts I could put you in touch with." Hope flickered to life inside me. "I'd appreciate that." And one more thing. I'm presenting some of my preliminary footage at the Historical Society meeting on Thursday. Would you be willing to say a few words about your lighthouse? Personal testimonies can be powerful in rallying community support. The Historical Society, where Everett would be speaking. I hesitated only briefly. I'll be there. By the time I returned to the lighthouse, the afternoon was waning. I had a few hours before dinner at Winnie's, time enough to start formulating a real plan. I sat at my small desk in the cottage, surrounded by the ledgers and records Harold had kept meticulously for decades, and that I'd continued in my own, less orderly fashion. The financial picture wasn't dire, but it wasn't rosy either. The B&B income covered basic maintenance and my modest living expenses, but major repairs required dipping into savings that wouldn't last forever. I needed new revenue streams, ways to make the lighthouse valuable beyond summer tourism. Ways to prove to Bennett and Kendall and myself that I wasn't just clinging to the past, but building a future. I began making lists, winter events that could draw visitors during the off-season, educational programs for local schools, special tours focused on the lighthouse's history, publication opportunities, a book about the Whitaker family's generations of lighthouse keeping, perhaps. As ideas filled the page, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Excitement. Not just the determination to protect what was mine, but the thrill of creating something new, of reinventing myself at 72. The phone rang, interrupting my planning. I checked the caller ID, expecting Winnie confirming dinner. Instead, I saw Bennett's cell number. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Yes? Mom. His voice sounded strained. We made it back to Boston. Good. I waited, unwilling to make this easy for him. I wanted to apologize for everything, for springing this on you, for Kendall's behavior. We should have handled it differently. Yes, you should have. I kept my tone neutral, though my hand gripped the receiver tightly. Is that all? He sighed. The developers might still come tomorrow. I couldn't reach them to cancel. I'll handle it. Mom, please don't be difficult with them. They're just doing their job. Anger flared again. And I'm doing mine, protecting my home. At least hear what they have to offer. The numbers might surprise you. No amount of money will convince me to sell my lighthouse, Bennett. The sooner you and Kendall accept that, the better. It's not just about money, he protested. It's about your future. Your security. My future and my security are right here at Whitaker Light. I've made my decision. There was a long pause before he spoke again. Kendall's really upset. I imagine she is, I said coldly. It must be disappointing to learn your plans to dance on my grave have been delayed indefinitely. She didn't mean that. She was just frustrated. We both know she meant every word. Another pause. I love you, Mom. I don't want us to be estranged over this. The sincerity in his voice tugged at my heart despite my anger. He was still my son, the baby I'd cradled, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd watched make his way in the world, sometimes proudly, sometimes worriedly. I love you too, Bennett, but I need time, and I need you to respect my decision about the lighthouse. And if I can't convince Kendall to let it go, then you'll have to choose what matters more to you, your wife's ambitions or your mother's well-being. After we hung up, I sat staring at the phone, tears threatening. I didn't want to force my son to choose, but I wouldn't sacrifice my home, my purpose, my very identity to preserve a peace that had already been shattered by Kendall's cruel words. The setting sun cast long shadows across my desk, illuminating the lists I'd been making. Plans for the future. My future. With or without Bennett's support. I gathered my things and headed to Winnie's for dinner. The lighthouse standing tall behind me, its beam beginning to pulse as dusk settled over Port Haven. For nearly 150 years, it had guided ships safely to harbor through storms and darkness. Now it would guide me through this crisis. A beacon of purpose, a reminder of resilience. Kendall wanted to dance at my funeral. Fine. But first, I would show her, and everyone else, that Dolores Whitaker still had plenty of life left to live. And plenty of fight left in her, too. The Historical Society meeting was being held at the Port Haven Library, a stately brick building donated by a wealthy summer resident in the 1920s. By the time I arrived on Thursday evening, the meeting room was already half full. I recognized most of the faces, year-round residents like myself, a few summer homeowners who took an interest in local history, and some curious tourists. Winnie waved me over to a seat she'd saved near the front. "Quite a turnout," she whispered as I sat down. "Word's gotten around about those developers sniffing around your lighthouse." I'd given the development representatives short shrift when they'd shown up at my door on Tuesday. "Not for sale, not now, not ever," I'd told them before they could even begin their pitch. They'd left looking bewildered, clearly not used to such immediate rejection. "Everett's up first," Winnie continued. "Then your filmmaker friend. This is perfect timing, Dot." I nodded, suddenly nervous. I hadn't seen Everett in years, hadn't prepared what I might say if we spoke. Before I could worry further, Mabel Jenkins, the Historical Society president, called the meeting to order. "We're delighted to welcome back one of Port Haven's own," she announced, "Professor Emeritus Everett Sullivan, whose work on New England maritime history has earned him national recognition." Everett approached the podium, and my breath caught. He was older, of course, his once dark hair now completely silver, new lines etched around his eyes, but he still carried himself with the same quiet dignity I remembered. He still had those thoughtful eyes that seemed to take in everything. "Thank you, Mabel," he began. "It's good to be home after all these years." His presentation was engaging, a comprehensive overview of Maine's maritime heritage and the critical role lighthouses had played in the state's development. But what caught my attention was his emphasis on preservation. "These structures aren't just historical curiosities," he said passionately. "They're living connections to our past. Each one that falls to development or neglect is an irreplaceable loss." His eyes scanned the audience and paused when they landed on me. A flicker of recognition, a slight nod. Then he continued, but something in his tone changed, became more urgent. "Port Haven is fortunate to have Whitaker Light still in its original family's hands," he said. "A continuous line of stewardship that connects us directly to the 1870s. That kind of authenticity can't be manufactured or replicated by developers." A murmur went through the audience. So people did know about the developer's interest. After Everett concluded to enthusiastic applause, Jasper took the floor. He showed clips from his documentary work, including the preliminary footage he'd shot at my lighthouse 2 days earlier. Seeing Whitaker Light through his lens, the majestic tower against the dawn sky, the carefully preserved keeper's quarters, my own weathered hands running along the original brass fixtures, filled me with unexpected emotion. "We're losing these treasures at an alarming rate," Jasper told the audience. "Over 70% of America's historic lighthouses have been significantly altered or lost entirely over the past century." Then, to my surprise, he gestured toward me. "We're fortunate to have Dolores Whitaker with us tonight. For 15 years, she's maintained Whitaker Light on her own, continuing a family tradition that spans 5 generations. Mrs. Whitaker, would you share a few words about what the lighthouse means to you and the challenges of preservation?" All eyes turned to me. I hadn't prepared a speech, but as I rose and made my way to the front, I knew exactly what needed to be said. "Whitaker Light isn't just my home," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "It's a promise my husband's ancestors made to this community, to keep ships safe, to stand fast against storms, to be a beacon of reliability in an uncertain world." I looked out at the familiar faces. Neighbors who'd brought casseroles after Harold died. Fishermen whose families had relied on our light for generations. Summer visitors who returned year after year to stay in our B&B. "That promise is under threat," I continued. "Not from the weather or time, but from those who see the lighthouse as nothing but a potential profit. Who would turn it into a resort attraction, stripped of its history and purpose?" Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the room. "I won't sell," I said firmly. "But maintaining a 146-year-old lighthouse isn't easy or cheap. If Whitaker Light is going to survive for another century, it needs to be more than just a summer tourist stop. It needs to be a living part of this community year-round." I hadn't planned to make a public appeal, but the words came naturally. "I'm looking for ideas. Ways to make the lighthouse more accessible, more educational, more sustainable, because its story isn't over, and neither is mine." The applause that followed was immediate and heartfelt. As I returned to my seat, people reached out to touch my arm, to offer words of support. Winnie squeezed my hand, her eyes suspiciously bright. After the meeting, A small crowd gathered around me. The owner of the local tourboat company wanted to discuss adding the lighthouse to his route. A teacher from the elementary school asked about field trips. The head of the Chamber of Commerce mentioned grant opportunities for historical businesses. As the crowd thinned, I found myself face to face with Everett Sullivan. "Dolores," he said, his voice warm with recognition. "It's been too long." 15 years, I confirmed. "Not since Harold's funeral." He nodded, a flash of regret crossing his features. "I should have stayed in touch. I meant to, but life happens." I finished for him. "I understand." "I heard about the developers," he said, lowering his voice, "through the Historical Society grapevine. News travels fast in Port Haven. Some things never change." His smile was gentle. "I meant what I said about the importance of lighthouses like yours. If there's anything I can do to help, research for grant applications, documentation of historical significance, I'm at your disposal." Before I could respond, Jasper joined us, excitement evident in his rapid speech. "Mrs. Whitaker, that was perfect. Exactly the kind of personal testimony my documentary needs. And I've been thinking about your situation. What if we organized a winter festival at the lighthouse? A celebration of maritime heritage, maybe around the holidays. It could draw visitors during the off-season." "That's actually an excellent idea," Everett chimed in. "Historical tourism doesn't have to be limited to summer." As they bounced ideas back and forth, Everett with his academic perspective, Jasper with his filmmaker's eye, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Standing in this library where I'd first met Harold at a community dance 6 decades ago, now surrounded by new allies in my fight to save our lighthouse. And for the first time since overhearing Kendall's vicious words, I felt something stronger than anger or hurt. I felt hope. Not just that I could save the lighthouse, but that I could reinvent it, and myself in the process. Let Kendall dream of dancing at my funeral. I was too busy planning a resurrection. Autumn descended on coastal Maine with a painter's touch. The maples along the road to town blazed crimson, the birches turned golden, and the ocean deepened to a steely blue that matched the increasingly dramatic skies. October had always been my favorite month at the lighthouse. Tourist crowds thinned, leaving behind a peaceful quiet broken only by the cry of gulls and the constant rhythm of waves against the rocks below. 2 months had passed since Bennett and Kendall's disastrous visit, and I'd used that time well. The seeds planted at the Historical Society meeting had blossomed into concrete plans. Jasper's documentary on Whitaker Light was now in post-production, with a premiere scheduled at the Port Haven Community Center in December. Everett had helped me apply for 3 preservation grants, one of which had already been approved, enough to fund the critical north wall reinforcement before winter storms arrived. Most surprising was how the town had rallied around the lighthouse. When word spread about the developer's interest, it sparked a renewed appreciation for Whitaker Light among locals who had long taken it for granted. The Port Haven schools organized a field trip program bringing students to learn about maritime history. The local arts guild proposed a plein air painting weekend that drew artists from as far as Portland. Even old fishermen who'd used the light as a navigation point for decades stopped by with offers to help with maintenance. I was in the middle of one such project, repainting the peeling trim around the keeper's cottage windows, when Winnie's ancient station wagon crunched up the gravel drive. She emerged with a covered dish and a determined expression I recognized all too well. "You need to eat something that isn't from a can," she announced, making her way to where I stood on a ladder. "And I need to tell you what I heard at the pharmacy yesterday." I climbed down, brushing paint flecks from my hands. "Gossip or actual news?" "Both." Her eyes sparkled behind her glasses. "Mabel Jenkins filled her blood pressure prescription, and while I was counting pills, she mentioned that her niece works for a real estate office in Boston. And?" I led the way into the kitchen, where the aroma from Winnie's dish, likely her famous seafood casserole, filled the small space. "And that niece overheard something interesting about a certain development company that was interested in properties along the Maine coast." She set the casserole on the counter with a triumphant look. "Seems they've run into financial troubles. 2 of their investors pulled out after some questionable practices came to light in their Cape Cod project." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, one I hadn't fully acknowledged was there. "So they're not coming back. Not anytime soon." Winnie busied herself finding plates in my cupboard. But that's not all. The niece says your daughter-in-law has been calling the real estate office, asking about other potential buyers for a historic property with development potential in coastal Maine. The momentary relief evaporated. Kendall's still trying to sell my home. Behind your back, it seems. Winnie's face softened with sympathy. Have you spoken to Bennett recently? I shook my head. Our last conversation, a brief, awkward phone call on my birthday 3 weeks ago, had ended with his vague promise to visit soon. Without Kendall, he'd added, as if that might tempt me. You should call him, Winnie advised. Let him know you're aware of what she's doing. It wouldn't change anything. He's made his choice. I turned away, pretending to be absorbed in finding cutlery for the casserole. In truth, Bennett's betrayal still ached like a physical wound. My own son, willing to stand by while his wife plotted to sell my home and wished for my death. There were moments when the pain of it stole my breath, usually in the quiet hours before dawn, when I couldn't distract myself with work. At least the lighthouse is safer now, I said finally. With the preservation grant and the new programs bringing in revenue, I can prove it's sustainable. Winnie nodded, but her expression remained troubled. Just be careful, Dot. Kendall doesn't strike me as the type to give up easily. After lunch, Winnie helped me finish painting the window trim, our conversation turning to lighter topics, the upcoming harvest festival in town, the book club selection she was struggling through, her grandson's college applications. The easy rhythm of friendship provided a balm for the unease her news had stirred. As afternoon faded toward evening, another vehicle appeared on the lighthouse road, Everett's sensible sedan. He'd become a regular visitor over the past weeks, initially bringing grant paperwork and historical records, then staying for coffee and conversations that stretched into dinner. There was a comfortable familiarity between us now, a rekindled friendship that carried echoes of what might have been long ago, before Harold had entered my life. Winnie departed with a knowing look as Everett arrived, carrying a stack of papers and a bottle of wine. Historical Society documents, he explained, holding up the papers, and a decent Cabernet, because reviewing budget projections requires fortification. We settled in the small study off the kitchen, where generations of lighthouse keepers had maintained their logs and records. Harold's desk dominated the space, its surface now covered with my grant applications, business plans, and the visitor logbook that had grown impressively thicker since summer. The numbers look good, Everett said after reviewing the figures I'd compiled. Between the school programs, the holiday events Jasper proposed, and the artist weekends, you've created a sustainable model. The lighthouse isn't just surviving, it's thriving. Pride warmed me as I poured the wine into mismatched mugs, proper wine glasses being one of many luxuries the keeper's cottage lacked. It's working better than I expected. Last weekend's photography workshop was completely booked. You should be proud, Dolores. You've done what most people half your age couldn't accomplish. Which is reinvention. He smiled, raising his mug in a toast. To new beginnings, even at our age. Especially at our age, I corrected, clinking my mug against his. When we have the least time to waste. As darkness fell, we moved to the small porch that faced the ocean, wrapped in sweaters against the October chill. The lighthouse beam swept overhead in its steady rhythm, a comfort as familiar as my own heartbeat. I've been meaning to ask, Everett said after a comfortable silence. Have you thought about what happens to the lighthouse in the long term? He stopped abruptly. After I'm gone? I finished for him. It's a fair question. And yes, I've thought about it constantly since Bennett and Kendall's visit. The matter of succession had haunted me for months. The lighthouse would legally pass to Bennett upon my death. That hadn't changed. But what would prevent him from selling it immediately to fulfill Kendall's ambitions? I've consulted a lawyer in Portland, I admitted. There are options. I could create a trust, establish conservation easements that would prevent development even after the property changes hands. But it's complicated and honestly painful to think about. Everett nodded, understanding in his eyes. Because you'd be planning for a future where your son might betray your wishes. Exactly. I sighed, watching the beam disappear into the darkness over the Atlantic before reappearing seconds later. I still love him, Everett, despite everything. He's my only child. Of course you do. Everett's voice was gentle. Love doesn't disappear because someone disappoints us. Sometimes it just changes shape. We sat in silence for a while longer, the wine and conversation creating a bubble of warmth against the autumn night. When Everett finally rose to leave, he hesitated at the porch steps. "The Historical Society is organizing a Veterans Day event," he said. "A small ceremony at the memorial in the town square, followed by dinner at the community center. I was wondering if you might accompany me." The invitation caught me off guard. Not because it was unexpected, we'd been dancing around something more than friendship for weeks, but because it represented another step forward, away from grief and isolation, toward whatever new chapter was unfolding. "I'd like that," I said simply. His smile in the porch light was worth any uncertainty I felt. "Good night, Dolores." "Good night, Everett." After he left, I remained on the porch, watching the play of moonlight on the water. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive, not just existing in the aftermath of loss, but building something new. The lighthouse stood sentinel beside me, its beam cutting through darkness as it had for nearly 150 years. We had both been reinvented by necessity. We had both found new purpose. Let Kendall scheme from Boston. Let Bennett waver in his loyalties. I was Dolores Whitaker, keeper of Whitaker Light, and I was no longer just preserving the past. I was creating a future. The Veterans Day ceremony was modest but moving. A color guard from the high school, speeches honoring local service members, a wreath laid at the simple stone monument that had stood in Port Haven Square since 1920. Everett, I learned, had served a brief stint in the Army before pursuing his academic career. He stood straighter during the playing of taps, his expression solemn. Afterward, the community center buzzed with conversation as residents shared a potluck dinner. I found myself at the center of several discussions about the lighthouse programs, accepting compliments and fielding questions about upcoming events with a confidence that would have surprised my former self. "You're becoming quite the entrepreneur," Everett observed as we filled our plates at the buffet table. "I overheard Sal talking about investing in your holiday light display idea." I smiled, still getting used to this new role. The whole town seems invested in the lighthouse now. It's not just my project anymore. That's how preservation works best, when the community recognizes the value of what they might lose. We found seats at a table with Winnie and Jasper, who had extended his stay in Port Haven well beyond his original plan. The documentary about Whitaker Light had evolved into a broader project about the community's relationship with its maritime heritage. "I've been interviewing the older fishermen," Jasper explained, gesturing with his fork. "The stories they tell about using the lighthouse as a navigation point during storms, it's incredible material. Adds a whole new dimension to the historical record." "Speaking of historical records," Winnie interjected, "did you tell Dot what you found in the county archives?" Everett nodded, turning to me with an excited gleam in his eyes. "I was researching the original land grant for the lighthouse property and discovered something interesting. The deed includes a covenant requiring the land to be used for the public good and maritime safety. It's archaic language, but a good lawyer might argue that it prevents the property from being developed for purely private commercial use." Hope sparked within me. "You mean it could legally block a resort development?" "Possibly. It's not ironclad, but it's another layer of protection. I've asked a colleague who specializes in historical property law to review it." The conversation continued through dinner, filled with ideas and possibilities. By the time dessert was served, an assortment of pies made by the church ladies' auxiliary, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the overheated community center. These people, Everett with his academic persistence, Winnie with her fierce loyalty, Jasper with his storyteller's passion, had become more than allies in my fight to save the lighthouse. They had become a chosen family. As we prepared to leave, the community center door swung open, letting in a blast of cold air and a latecomer. I froze, pie fork halfway to my mouth. Bennett stood in the doorway, scanning the room until his eyes locked with mine. My son looked tired, the lines around his mouth deeper than I remembered from his visit 2 months ago. He wore city clothes, a wool overcoat and leather gloves that seemed out of place among the practical parkas and knit hats of Port Haven residents. "Mom," he said, approaching our table. "I tried calling, but your phone went straight to voicemail. I'd left my cell phone at the lighthouse, not expecting to need it for a local event." "Bennett, what are you doing here?" He glanced around the crowded room, clearly uncomfortable with our audience. Could we talk privately? Everett stood, giving my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. We'll give you some space. No, I said, placing my hand over his. Whatever Bennett has to say, he can say in front of my friends. Bennett's expression tightened, but he pulled up a chair. Fine, I came to warn you. Kendall's on her way here. Here? To Port Haven? Alarm shot through me. Why? She found another buyer, a hotel chain looking to expand into experiential lodging, whatever that means. She's bringing their representative to see the lighthouse tomorrow. I felt the blood drain from my face. She has no right. I know. Bennett looked genuinely distressed. I told her that, but she's convinced that if they make a good enough offer, you'll change your mind, or that they can wait you out. Wait me out? The euphemism for my death hung in the air, unspoken but understood by everyone at the table. I tried to stop her. He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture that reminded me so painfully of Harold. We've been fighting about it for weeks. I finally told her I wouldn't be part of pressuring you anymore, and He trailed off. She what, Bennett? She said she didn't need me for this, that she'd handle it herself. He met my eyes directly for the first time. I think she's desperate, Mom. The Boston condo she convinced me to buy is underwater on the mortgage. She's been counting on the lighthouse money to fix our finances. The pieces clicked into place. Kendall's obsession with selling, her increasing desperation, her willingness to wish for my death to get what she wanted. It wasn't just ambition, it was financial necessity. So you came to warn me, I said slowly, but not to stop her. His gaze dropped to the table. I don't know if I can stop her at this point. Everett leaned forward. What time are they coming tomorrow? Around noon. The hotel rep is driving up from Portland in the morning. I exchanged glances with Winnie, Jasper, and Everett, reading the same determination in their expressions that I felt hardening within me. Thank you for the warning, I told Bennett. We'll be ready for them. We? He asked, looking around the table. The lighthouse isn't just mine anymore, I explained. It belongs to this community now. Bennett's expression was hard to read, part confusion, part regret, and something else that might have been envy. I should find a room for the night. The Marina Inn has vacancies, Jasper offered. Off-season rates. Or you could stay at the lighthouse, I said, surprising myself. There are no guests in the B&B rooms right now. Bennett hesitated, clearly torn. I don't want to intrude. You're my son, I said simply, despite everything. The drive back to the lighthouse was silent, Bennett following in his rental car. As we crested the final hill and the lighthouse came into view, its beams sweeping across the night sky, I wondered what he saw. The family home he'd taken for granted? A financial asset to be liquidated? Or perhaps, for the first time, he was seeing it as I did. A legacy, a purpose, a beacon of constancy in a changing world. Inside the keeper's cottage, I showed him to the Blue Room, the largest of the B&B accommodations, with a view of both the lighthouse and the ocean. The room where he and Kendall had stayed during their last visit. Things have changed around here, he observed, noting the new brochures on the entry table, the framed poster announcing Jasper's documentary premiere, the visitor log bulging with recent signatures. For the better, I confirmed. The lighthouse is financially stable now. More than stable, it's growing. He nodded slowly. That's good. I'm glad. We stood awkwardly in the hallway, mother and son separated by more than just physical space. There was so much I wanted to say, so many questions I wanted to ask. Had he known about their financial troubles when he'd pressed me to sell? Had he ever stood up to Kendall before now? Did he remember the summers he'd spent here as a boy, helping his father with lighthouse maintenance, beaming with pride when tourists mistook him for a junior keeper? Instead, I simply said, "Breakfast is at 7 if you want it. I need to be up early for the morning inspection." "Mom," he called as I turned to go. "I am sorry. For all of it." I paused but didn't turn around. "I know you are, Bennett. The question is what you're going to do about it now." Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of the lighthouse, the soft mechanical hum of the rotating light, the wind whistling around the tower, the distant crash of waves against the rocks below. Somewhere down the hall, my son slept in the room where tourists usually stayed, a visitor in what should have been his second home. By dawn, I had a plan. Or rather, the community had a plan, coordinated through a flurry of early morning phone calls. Winnie would alert the town. Jasper would bring his camera equipment. Everett would contact his legal colleague about the property covenant. And I would face Kendall with the full force of Whitaker determination, the same determination that had kept the light burning through hurricanes, blizzards, and wars for nearly a century and a half. Bennett found me in the kitchen at 7, already dressed and on my second cup of coffee. He looked rumpled and tired, as if his night had been as restless as mine. "You're really not going to sell, are you?" he asked, accepting the mug I offered him. "Never," I confirmed. "Not to Kendall's hotel chain, not to anyone." He nodded slowly. "I'm beginning to understand why." "Are you?" I studied my son's face, searching for the boy I'd raised. "Then help me make Kendall understand too." "I've tried, Mom. For months. She won't listen to me anymore." "Then don't tell her. Show her." By 11, the lighthouse grounds had transformed. Cars lined the narrow access road. Winnie had mobilized what seemed like half the town, fishermen in their work clothes, shop owners who'd closed early, retirees who'd known Harold, parents with children who'd visited on school trips. They spread out across the property, some carrying handmade signs, "Save Whitaker Light," and "Historic Landmark Not for Sale," and "Keep Our Heritage Alive." Jasper set up his camera equipment near the lighthouse base, ready to document whatever unfolded. Everett stationed himself on the porch with a folder of legal documents, and I waited in the keeper's cottage kitchen, Bennett beside me, watching through the window for Kendall's arrival. She appeared exactly at noon, stepping out of a sleek rental car with a man in an expensive suit. Her expression shifted from determination to confusion as she took in the crowd. Then she spotted Bennett's rental car, and confusion hardened into anger. The kitchen door burst open moments later. "What the hell is this?" Kendall demanded, storming in with the hotel representative trailing awkwardly behind. "Some kind of ambush?" "Welcome back, Kendall," I said calmly. "I understand you've brought another buyer to see my home without my permission." The hotel man cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitaker, I'm David Pearson from Coastal Heritage Hotels. I was given to understand that you were interested in discussing—" "She's not," Bennett interrupted, stepping forward. "The lighthouse isn't for sale. I tried to tell you that," he added to Kendall. "You?" Kendall's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here? You were supposed to be at the conference in New York." "I lied," Bennett admitted. "I came to warn my mother instead." Kendall's face flushed with rage. "You chose her over me? After everything we've discussed?" "I chose to do the right thing," Bennett said quietly. "Finally." Mr. Pearson looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Perhaps this isn't the best time." "There will never be a good time," I told him firmly. "Whitaker Light is not for sale. Not now, not in the future. It's a protected historical property with a covenant requiring it to serve the public good." Everett appeared in the doorway, legal folder in hand. "I have the documentation right here, if you'd like to review it, Mr. Pearson. The original deed from 1879 is quite specific about permitted uses." Pearson glanced at the papers, then at the crowd visible through the windows, then at Kendall's furious face. "Mrs. Hargrove, you assured me the owner was amenable to an offer." "She will be when she hears the numbers," Kendall insisted. "Everyone has a price." "Not for this," I said, gesturing around us. "Not for my home, my history, my purpose. Some things can't be bought, Kendall." "Don't be naive," she snapped. "It's a building, an old, crumbling building that costs more to maintain than it's worth." "Is it?" I led them to the window. "Look outside. Those people aren't here for a building. They're here for what it represents: continuity, community, a connection to something larger than themselves. That's what you've never understood." Kendall stared at the gathering, her expression unreadable. "This is... what? Some small-town protest to guilt me into backing down?" "This is Port Haven showing you what matters to them," I corrected. "The lighthouse isn't just mine. It belongs to this community in ways a deed can't capture." Jasper appeared at the door, camera in hand. "Mrs. Whitaker? We're ready for your statement whenever you are." "Statement?" Kendall echoed. "For the documentary," Jasper explained. "We're documenting threatened historic lighthouses along the coast. Mrs. Whitaker's story, and her fight to preserve Whitaker Light against development, is our centerpiece." Mr. Pearson took a step back. "A documentary? Mrs. Hargrove, you didn't mention media involvement. Coastal Heritage Hotels prefers to avoid negative publicity. There's no publicity, Kendall protested. It's just some local project. Actually, Jasper said pleasantly, we've secured distribution with a major streaming service. They're particularly interested in stories about communities fighting to preserve their heritage against corporate development. It was a bluff. The documentary had no distribution deal yet, but Pearson didn't know that. He began edging toward the door. I think I've seen enough for today. Mrs. Hargrove, I'll be in touch. Mrs. Whitaker, I apologize for the intrusion. As he escaped out the door, Kendall rounded on Jasper. You're lying. There's no streaming deal. Not yet, he acknowledged with a shrug. But there could be, especially now that we have footage of a hotel chain trying to pressure an elderly widow into selling her historic family home. That kind of David versus Goliath story tends to go viral. Kendall turned to Bennett, desperation replacing anger. Are you going to let them do this? Humiliate me? Ruin our plans? Our plans? Bennett repeated. They were never our plans, Kendall. They were your plans. I went along with them because I was weak and because I didn't understand what the lighthouse really meant, to my mother or to this town. So that's it? You're choosing this crumbling pile of rocks over our future? Over me? Bennett looked at me, then back at his wife. I'm choosing to honor my family's legacy. And if you truly loved me, you'd understand why that matters. Something in Kendall's expression shifted, a calculation visible behind her eyes. Fine. Keep your precious lighthouse, but don't expect me to wait around while you play the dutiful son. We need that money, Bennett. The condo, the credit cards, they won't wait for your mother to... She caught herself, but not before I heard the unspoken end of that sentence. For your mother to die. To what, Kendall? I asked, stepping closer. Go ahead, say it. For me to die so you can cash in? So you can dance at my funeral, like you promised? Her face paled. You heard that? Every word, I confirmed. That night by the lighthouse, every cruel, calculating word. Kendall's composure cracked. You don't understand. We're drowning in debt. The Boston real estate market crashed just after we bought. Bennett's firm is downsizing. We need this. And that justifies wishing me dead? I asked quietly. Plotting to sell my home out from under me? Treating me like an inconvenient obstacle rather than a person? Before she could answer, the kitchen door opened again. Winnie bustled in, followed by several other townspeople. Dot, the TV crew from Portland is here. They want to interview you about the preservation efforts. TV crew? Kendall's voice rose in panic. You called the news? Word travels fast in small towns, Winnie said with unconcealed satisfaction. Especially when outsiders try to bully one of our own. Kendall looked from Winnie to Jasper's camera to the crowd outside, her carefully constructed plans visibly unraveling. This is insane. You're all insane, acting like this over a building. Not a building, Bennett said quietly. A legacy, my legacy. The one thing my father asked me to protect when he died. Your father has been dead for 15 years, and his request still stands, Bennett countered. I failed him, and my mother, by forgetting that. I won't fail again. Kendall stared at him, recognition dawning in her eyes. You're serious. You're really choosing this lighthouse over our marriage. I'm choosing integrity, Bennett said simply, something I'd lost sight of until now. The moments stretched between them, years of marriage balanced against the weight of family obligation and newfound conviction. Finally, Kendall turned to me, her voice low and dangerous. This isn't over, Dot. You've turned my husband against me, humiliated me in front of clients, made me look like a villain. You did that yourself, I replied calmly. The moment you decided my death was an acceptable price for your ambitions. She flinched as if struck. Then, without another word, she stormed out, pushing past the gathered townspeople, ignoring the camera Jasper had raised to capture her exit. In the silence that followed, Bennett exhaled shakily. He gestured vaguely toward the door. Go after her? I asked. He nodded. We have things to resolve, one way or another. I understand. And I did. Whatever happened between them now, reconciliation, separation, divorce, was their business. My son had finally stood up for what was right. That was enough for me. As Bennett followed his wife outside, Everett moved to my side. "Are you all right?" I watched through the window as Kendall's rental car sped down the lighthouse road, Bennett standing alone in its wake. "I will be," I said. "We all will be." The impromptu gathering evolved into a celebration as word spread that the hotel developers had retreated. Someone brought out guitars. Someone else produced a cooler of beer. Children played tag around the lighthouse base while their parents shared stories of what Whitaker Light meant to them. Standing on the keeper's cottage porch as the autumn sun began its early descent, I felt a profound sense of vindication. Kendall had wanted to dance at my funeral, to celebrate the end of what I represented. Instead, I was very much alive, surrounded by community, purpose, and new beginnings. Let her rage from Boston. Let her plot and scheme. The lighthouse had withstood fiercer storms than Kendall Hargrove for nearly 150 years. And so had the women who kept it. Winter descended upon the Maine coast with its familiar brutality, howling nor'easters, ice that formed in fantastic sculptures along the rocks, and snow that transformed the lighthouse into a pristine white tower against leaden skies. Through it all, the light continued its steady rhythm, a beacon in the darkness that seemed more meaningful than ever. 3 months had passed since the confrontation with Kendall. Bennett had returned to Boston that day, promising to sort things out and stay in touch. His calls came weekly now, awkward at first, then gradually warming as we rebuilt the connection that had frayed over the years. He and Kendall had separated, he told me. Their financial troubles had been worse than he'd admitted, and the truth of their situation had finally emerged in the aftermath of that day at the lighthouse. "She was desperate," he explained during one call. "It doesn't excuse what she said about you, but she was drowning in debt she'd hidden from me. I didn't need the details. The knowledge that my son had found his moral compass again was enough." December brought the premiere of Jasper's documentary at the Port Haven Community Center. Keepers of the Light, the Whitaker legacy, played to a packed house, not just locals, but people from neighboring coastal towns, state historical preservation officials, and even a reporter from a Portland newspaper. Seeing my life, our lighthouse, on screen brought tears to my eyes. Not from sadness, but from the profound realization that our story would outlive me. The holiday season at Whitaker Light exceeded all expectations. The winter festival Jasper had suggested drew hundreds of visitors despite the cold. Fairy lights twined around the lighthouse tower, visible for miles across the dark water. Children roasted marshmallows at fire pits while their parents sipped hot cider and listened to local musicians. The keeper's cottage, transformed into a holiday wonderland, hosted workshops on maritime crafts and lighthouse history. Through it all, Everett remained steadfastly at my side. Our relationship had deepened with each passing week, evolving from rekindled friendship into something neither of us had expected at our age, a second chance at love. We didn't speak of it directly, but it was there in the lingering goodnight kisses, in the way his hand sought mine during lighthouse tours, in the quiet evenings planning future events with our heads bent together over the kitchen table. On New Year's Eve, the lighthouse hosted its first ever midnight celebration. Bundled against the cold, dozens of Port Haven residents gathered on the grounds to watch fireworks over the Atlantic and witness the first light of the new year sweeping across the water. At the stroke of midnight, Everett kissed me beneath the tower my husband's family had tended for generations, and I felt no guilt, only gratitude for this unexpected chapter of my life. January brought a certified letter from a Boston law firm. My hands trembled as I opened it, fearing some new scheme of Kendall's. Instead, I found divorce papers Bennett had filed, along with a personal note. "Mom, I've learned a lot these past months. About myself, about what matters. Kendall and I are finished. The divorce will be final soon. I've accepted a position with a smaller firm in Portland starting in March. I'd like to visit more often, if that's okay. Maybe help with the lighthouse like Dad and I used to. Love, Bennett." I read the note 3 times, tears blurring the words. My son was coming home, not to stay, but to reconnect with a legacy he'd nearly discarded. February arrived with another nor'easter, this one fiercer than usual. As the storm intensified, I performed the additional safety checks Harold had insisted upon during bad weather. backup generator, emergency supplies, structural integrity of the tower. Everett, staying overnight due to the dangerous driving conditions, helped me secure the shutters and move valuable items away from potential leaks. "Your husband trained you well," he observed as we finished our preparations. "He did," I agreed, "though I've added a few protocols of my own over the years." We settled in the study with the wood stove crackling and the wind howling outside. The lighthouse beam cut through the swirling snow, steady despite nature's fury. "I've been thinking," Everett said carefully, "about what happens next. With the storm? With us. With the lighthouse. With everything." I set down my tea, giving him my full attention. "And what conclusions have you reached, Professor Sullivan?" "That life offers unexpected gifts to those patient enough to receive them." He took my hand. 15 years ago, after Harold's funeral, I left town because I couldn't bear to see you in pain. I thought I was being respectful, but really, I was being a coward. Everett, let me finish." His thumb traced circles on my palm. "I don't want to waste any more time. I love you, Dolores. I think I always have, even when you were Harold's wife. And now that we've found each other again, I want to build something lasting. Together." The wind rattled the windows as if punctuating his declaration. "Are you proposing, Everett Sullivan?" "I'm suggesting a partnership. In life, in love, in protecting this lighthouse for generations to come." I thought about Kendall's cruel words that summer night, her eagerness to dance at my funeral, to celebrate the end of what I represented. How wrong she had been. I wasn't an ending, but a continuation, another link in the long chain of Whitaker lightkeepers. "Yes," I said simply, "to all of it." Spring came early that year, crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow around the keeper's cottage. The lighthouse, freshly painted and structurally sound thanks to the preservation grant, gleamed white against the returning blue of the sky. Visitors began arriving again, some returning from previous years, others drawn by Jasper's documentary, which had indeed secured a streaming deal. Bennett came as promised, spending weekends helping with maintenance and learning the business side of the lighthouse operations. He brought a young woman with him sometimes, Sarah, a marine biologist from the Portland Research Center, who looked at the lighthouse with genuine appreciation rather than calculating its value. One April morning, I climbed the tower for my daily inspection, moving more slowly than before but still steady. From the observation deck, I could see fishing boats heading out for the day, the town of Port Haven stirring to life, and Everett walking up the path from his car, a bouquet of spring flowers in hand. Kendall had wanted to dance at my funeral, to celebrate my end. Instead, I had found a new beginning. If you enjoyed my story, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss my next video. And if this resonated with you, leave a comment below sharing a time when someone underestimated you. I read every single one.